So I have the great honor of introducing our speaker, Karli Willis. Karli is an associate in research at the Florida Center for Reading Research. She's a certified teacher with 5 years of experience and a master's degree in elementary education. Since 2007, she's been key personnel on numerous professional development and research projects at Florida Center for Reading Research, working with Dr. Chris Lonigan and Beth Phillips, and doing research all over the United States, including in Spanish. So wide experience here. So her responsibility on these projects is the design and training on language and literacy instructional materials for early childhood and elementary grade classrooms. She has extensive experience in professional development, including coaching classroom teachers and training other coaches. And on the regional lab, she's been doing a project in Mississippi where she's coaching the coaches who work in the Head Start and center-based and public pre-K programs. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Karli.
Thank you, Dr. Foorman. Thank you all for being here and for finding your way through the maze. And I just, a show of hands, wanted to see how many teachers, current preschool teachers, we had here with us today. Okay, wonderful. Just trying to get an idea of what we wanted to get out of this session. So we're here talking about the Ready School, and my focus today is going to be on language and vocabulary primarily. We've done a lot of research over decades about print knowledge and phonological awareness, and we know how to teach those pretty well now. And there's lots of curricula available to assist us in that. But language and vocabulary seems to be more challenging for us. It's even harder to assess a child's language and vocabulary abilities. And so that's what my focus today is on and why it's important. And so I wanted to touch on the BPK standards just to kind of get us all on the same page about how this comes up in language and literacy. We've got speaking and vocabulary and having children learn to express themselves using sophisticated and rich language and vocabulary, as well as to receptively understand those things. And then we move into sentences and structure, talking about a variety of parts of speech and using independent and dependent clauses in their conversation makes their language more sophisticated, right? So our standards address that. And then we move into conversation, and I'm going to refer to conversation throughout our time together as a volley going back and forth. Imagine a volleyball, right? And we want that volleyball to go back and forth over the net as many times as possible. Those are the kinds of conversations we want to be having with children. We want them to be multiple turns, both on the part of the teacher and the child, because the way we learn language and vocabulary is by practicing it. And so that's what we want in our conversation and language development. So what's a promising way to teach vocabulary to children? Well, we're going to learn that, but before we do, I want to give you a little bit of a test. Did you all know you were going to be tested? Okay, so what does the word gladius mean? Definition, sentence use, anybody? Edile, Callens. No one wants to take a stab? Okay. So, like I said to the last group who also could not do that, I feel very relieved because my biggest fear was that someone was going to be able to define those and just mess up my whole point. So basically, I'm trying to put you in the mind of a child, right? A child who is 4 years old and their teacher is saying, tell me what you did yesterday, but the child does not know what yesterday means, which is a very common problem. Yesterday and tomorrow are very confusing concepts for a 4-year-old. And so when we do that without any support, then the child is confused and then becomes frustrated. And so that's how it feels, that sort of discomfort that you had about, well, I don't know. That's the way they feel. And so what if I went and I provided you some visual images and the start of a word map or a word network? Could you take a better stab at what these words mean? Now you at least know we're in ancient Rome, right? And then if I went a step further and I said, okay, let's build out this word map, right? And I started adding things like sword and fight to our term gladius, then maybe now you can take a step and say, well, maybe it's a weapon that the Roman soldiers used, which is absolutely correct. But you get a better understanding not only of these very novel words, but also a deeper understanding of some words you might already be familiar with in the context of this particular theme. And so that's what I'm going to encourage you to do today, is to teach words in relationships when you teach words to children. Much better than saying a hula hoop is, an esophagus is, and they're completely unrelated, and the children aren't able to fully internalize and understand the meanings of those words. So, we already heard from Nicole Patentary this morning about why language is important, and that Talk With Me Baby initiative, and how we need to be interacting with children and talking to them right out the gate, right? But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we move through our time together here. Language connects to so many other areas of a child's life. It gives us the most bang for our buck if we have to pick and choose what to teach. Language is going to influence child success in reading, math, social skills. We are giving children a voice when we teach vocabulary and language. And children enter preschool, they come to us to prepare for kindergarten with a variety of skills, right? Some children have been read to every day of their life and spoken to in a good, rich language environment, and other children have only gotten directives, maybe only disciplinary conversations. Some children that we've worked with haven't had a book read to them before they enter preschool. So we're arriving with a wide range of abilities. And the urgency here at this point, for preschool teachers particularly, is if we don't catch them in pre-K and kindergarten, all of a sudden those skills become locked in as they move into first and second grade. And then they grow. All children are still continuing to grow in their development, but they're locked in. And so this gap between the less advantaged and the more advantaged children, the children with more language and vocabulary skills, that gap sort of stays, and they're stuck now. And they grow, but they grow in parallel. And so we have this great opportunity as early childhood educators to close that gap, to help these children catch up so that they can be successful in all those areas, right, as they go through their schooling. So, how does language connect to reading? We're the Florida Center for Reading Research. How does it connect to reading? Well, language helps in decoding skills. Oh dear. Okay. Language helps us in decoding skills. It helps us in phonological awareness skills, and then ultimately in reading comprehension, which, as we all know, is our ultimate goal. Listening comprehension or reading comprehension is making meaning out of what we're reading or hearing. And language is facilitating that. You can see in this figure all of the different ways that language influences a child's life. So it's helping their social skills, it's helping them communicate with the world around them. Many children arrive at school already behind their peers. And so most just don't catch up from attending school implicitly. Many children develop language skills implicitly from hearing language around them. But if a child comes in behind, then they need extra support. They need intentional planning and teachers who are targeting these skills and explicitly and intentionally practicing those skills with the children. So teachers have a ton to do They have teeth brushing and hand washing and meals and snacks, and they're cleaning and they're doing it all. And now we're saying, okay, on top of all of that and the letters and the math, now we want you to also give them a rich language environment and teach them vocabulary. And so how do we do that without making the teachers feel like really another thing? We want to maximize our effectiveness. We want to use the entire school day. We don't want language to be a time on their schedule and to teach language from 9 to 9:15. We want it to be something they do all day long in their interactions with the children in their classrooms. That's how we're going to see a difference. We want them to do it in large group, in small group, one-on-one with children, while they're brushing their teeth or washing their hands, having conversations with those children. That's where the change is going to occur. We're really big proponents, and our research has shown that small group instruction is where we're going to see the biggest benefit. And so I always encourage administrators, directors, to be okay with lots of small group instruction. I think that's a hard thing for some administrators to feel comfortable with. We want to see everyone sitting in the classroom and then having a lesson, right? But it is perfectly fine, especially in pre-K, if the teacher has a group of kids and then other kids are playing in this center and other kids are playing over here. They're talking to each other. There's lots of noise. Why is the noise good? They're talking, right? They're practicing these language skills. How do we get better at something? We get better at it by doing it. And so that's why we want the kids talking to each other, talking to their teacher. And the best way, all of you are sitting here listening to me talk, none of you are talking, so you're not practicing your language skills. But if I pulled the 4 of you over and we just had a very small group, then all of you would be contributing and we would be having a discussion. And that's why small group is so important. It's giving kids the opportunity to talk and practice language. So how do we support vocabulary growth? It's really important to pick out words carefully to teach children. Lots of different parts of speech. Oftentimes teachers have a noun bias. They like to teach nouns. It's easy to teach nouns. I can bring in an object or a picture and I can say, this is a telescope. Super easy. Check vocabulary off my list, right? It's much harder to show a child what saturate, something being saturated means, or a sunny day, right? And so these words are just as important and more useful in growing a child's vocabulary. I'm going to talk a lot today about vocabulary networks and making connections and building connections. And so I encourage you to teach vocabulary within the context of networks, and we'll talk about that more. But word knowledge is world knowledge. As we deepen a child's understanding of words and vocabulary, they're gaining knowledge about the world around them. So, anyone, just call out some ways that you can describe this picture.
Outside.
Outside. Playing, fun. Colorful. Oh, I liked that.
Pooping.
Bright.
Sunny.
Sunny. Active, yes. So y'all are the star group because you came up with lots of words that weren't nouns. But, that is important. We want to be looking at these things for a variety of different nouns, adjectives. How do you describe this picture? What are some things in this picture that will be useful for the children? Now, why would I not want to teach? If I could only teach one word from this picture, why would I not want to teach a word? I hear like little whispers. Okay, good. Right. How many of you have used the word hula hoop today in your conversation? Right? We want words that the children can actually use in their conversation with lots of different people throughout their day, throughout the week, at home, at school, not just in a very specific, isolated situation, right? And so it would be better to teach cloudy or sunny or colorful because you can see those words being used in a lot of different contexts. And the more the children use the words in conversation, the more those words become their own. So infants and toddlers, they actually develop and acquire vocabulary more so for nouns than they do verbs and adjectives and adverbs. Makes sense, right? Because mom points and says dog, cat. And so we want to be able to teach them these other words that they're not getting the exposure to. And our evidence suggests that the children who have better vocabulary are able to have more knowledge of verbs and adverbs and adjectives than children who are lower in their vocabulary development. And so we want to target words other than those nouns. So word networks. Word networks help us create connections between words, help us to develop a deeper understanding of a word. And we build those word networks around themes or events, right? Preschool teachers love to teach in themes. We have farm, and we have ocean, and we have desert, right? And those are all very good ways to create a lot of vocabulary development and language, and it helps us extend those conversations throughout our day during center times when they're pretending to build a farm or these types of things. And so taking a trip, for instance, you can see that I still am teaching nouns. Nouns are important, but I also have added in verbs like packing and traveling, because all of these words are going to add to their ability and their depth of understanding for this particular event. Okay? But now I want you to think about it, organizing vocabulary in a totally different way. Vehicles, categories, right? Categories like vehicles, machines, animals. Why would I want to teach words this way? Well, if I'm teaching vehicles, I have vehicles in my farm unit, like a truck or a tractor. I have vehicles when I'm talking about the city, like a subway or a bus. I have vehicles when I'm talking about the ocean, like boats and submarines. And so as I'm listing words and coming up with words that belong in this category of vehicles, I'm seeing what makes a vehicle and what doesn't. Why is a chair not a vehicle, right? And so I'm better able to understand the difference, and it's deepening my understanding. The thing about categories, though, is that's kind of the way adults organize the words. I can assure you that if we could open up your brain and look at all of the words that you know and are familiar with, they are not listed alphabetically, right? They are listed in categories or networks. You group the words together, right? Well, children do too, but they tend to do it in themes. So it makes perfect sense that we teach in themes, right? But they don't naturally go to, I'm going to list all the vehicles I know. It's more all the farm words I know. Do you see the difference? And so we, as the adult, as the educator, want to guide children to be able to see these vocabulary words organized in a slightly different way that's going to cross themes. So you can see how the farm theme and the city theme overlapped as I talked about vehicles that we find in both. Okay? So that's what I want to challenge us to do and encourage our teachers to do in the classrooms with the children. Animals and mammals. As you begin to organize words into these categories, you start to see, well, what makes an animal and a mammal a mammal? How are those different? Now, how do we enhance vocabulary skills? We know it's important. Now, how do we do it? Well, again, we want to be very careful in the vocabulary words that we select. We want to get the biggest bang for the buck, right? So I tell the example of a teacher. I went into her classroom. She was super excited. She said, I taught my whole class esophagus. They all knew it. They could identify it. They could tell me what it did. They thought it was a super fancy word. And she was so proud of herself. And that's fantastic. But again, how many of you have used the word esophagus today, right? That is not a go-to word either. And so we don't want to pick the most novel, unusual word, the word that children are least likely to know out of all the children in your classroom. We want to pick words that are going to enrich their language and vocabulary and provide, practice with that word throughout their daily conversations with people. In an ocean theme, we have this great opportunity, really in all of language and vocabulary, you have a great chance to differentiate instruction. And so in something like an ocean theme, we can teach very basic words like swim and whale. We've got a verb and a noun. We also have some adjectives and adverbs, but very basic ones. And then we can also challenge our more advanced children to words like submerged, beluga whale, domesticated. And so we can do those simultaneously. We can teach these words and differentiate our instruction throughout our day, because remember, we're doing it all day long. Okay, so again, we don't want to teach very rare, isolated words. And nouns. Some nouns are more useful than others. Hula hoop, esophagus, not as useful as words like, I don't know, name some words that might be useful. Nouns.
Room.
I heard it.
Room.
Room.
We use it today.
Oh.
What room are we in? Right?
Yes, absolutely. So words that we can use in our everyday conversations are most useful. So now I want to show you a very good example of, we have a theme like desert. We're teaching desert words. But then each of these surrounding hexagons are categories that I can pull away from this theme and I can use in another theme, right? So if I'm teaching desert, I teach geography words like oasis, but then I can pull the geography category out and I can teach it in relation to the ocean, and I can teach it in relation to country and city, and also gain that crossover that I'm talking about, right? So all of our networks, if we can envision a child's mind and the connections they make, all of those networks begin to overlap. And as they do that, that's a good thing, because they're deepening their knowledge and understanding of not only the words, but also the concepts and their world knowledge. Okay, so whenever you're teaching vocabulary explicitly, you want repeated exposure of a word. We can't learn it in one time. If I give you that quiz about those ancient Roman words at the end of class, will you get it now? No, I wouldn't. But we also want to say the word aloud, and then we want to provide a child-friendly definition and prompt the children to say it. Now, what is this? Question 2 of your test, part 2. Oh, yes, she is star student today. It is a type of courtyard. It's called a peristyle. It's a courtyard surrounded by a colonnade, right? And so a lot of times this is what happens in preschool classrooms, okay? I'm putting you in the minds of a 4-year-old there again. I've been in lots of classrooms in lots of different states, cities around the country, and inevitably a teacher is super excited. She brings out something like a telescope. She sets it down, she's super excited, it goes with her state's theme, and she says to the children, "What is this?" as her lead-in, right? What is the problem with that? Okay, yes, we totally need to build background knowledge. Any other?
It's not the environment that it's normally seen in.
Oh, wow, this is a very advanced group, yes.
Well, it's in a classroom, not like outside, right?
Right,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. The problem that, and you all brought up excellent problems, but the problem that I'm addressing in this particular situation is that Billy's in the back of the room. He's never seen a telescope. He has no idea what it is. And he's 4 years old, so he has about that much of an attention span, right? Like, it's quick. And Bobby's sitting next to him, and Bobby's super excited because he knows it is a microscope, right? He is for sure of it. And Billy hears microscope, and now he has fast mapped that object to that label. And he's wrong, right? So just like my husband used to coach baseball, he hated when fathers would teach their kids how to pitch, and they would come to high school and they were pitching incorrectly, and it would take him extra time to have them relearn that, right? Same difference here. If he has now learned that this telescope is a microscope, it is going to take even more practice, even more exposure to relearn its correct label. And so that's why we want to have teachers bring it out and say, this is a telescope. Little less fun, but we avoid those potential problems. And then when I come back to it in a day or two, now I can play the guessing game. You remember what this is. And now we're more likely to get children that actually do. But if we are bringing a novel object or novel picture into our class, we want to begin with its label to avoid that fast mapping. Okay, so Dr. Foorman mentioned a project that I'm working on in Mississippi. Part of that project is teaching 3 explicit vocabulary instructional strategies to preschool teachers throughout the state. And one of those strategies is having preschool children create networks, okay? And you may say, well, that seems like an upper elementary kind of thing. But we have adapted it to make it age appropriate, and we've done that by adding pictures. And children at this age, they don't read. We don't want to make any assumptions about that. We don't want to require them to do that. But we can teach words with simple sketches. And you're going to see in just a second how a teacher does a small group lesson building a network with 4-year-olds where she is drawing pictures and discussing the words, okay? So, and it's not super loud, so I'll play just a little and listen here.
Called saturate. Saturate something. That means it's really wet. It's filled with water. Okay? So we're going to think of other words that relate to our word saturate. Can you think of any words that relate to our word saturate? Saturate, remember, is when it's filled with water and you have any more water in something or anything that's more completely saturated, that means nothing else will fit in it. It's really wet. Think of other words. A pond, that's a good word. How does that relate to it? How did you think of the word pond? What did you think of a pond? With a pond of this. Water in it? Anybody else? Sister. lots of water.
Notice how she's explaining how it connects to that center word as she's talking.
What? Oh, very good. What's a waterfall?
It comes down onto another one, but it comes down to the water.
It's water that comes from way up high. It's way up high and falling onto the rocks. What about this guy? I don't think he was in a puddle. Looks like he was maybe in a rainstorm. He is soaking wet. Do you know what it's called when someone is soaking wet? We can say they are drenched from head to toe. And that is also like saturated. He is drenched in water. So he has been saturated with something. He's drenched. Anything else you can think of that has to do with saturate?
A duck pond.
A duck pond?
When you put up the tree, something get down and be tired.
Yes, you might get tired. That's right. If you jump in a puddle long enough, it's going to make you tired from jumping. You got tired when you were in the puddle? What is this? Washing dishes. Do you
help my mama wash dishes.
You do.
My mom don't want me.
When you wash the dishes, what happens? You saturate the dishes in the sink with water? Put them in a bunch of soapy water, right? So that's related to our word saturate. So washing the dishes is an intent. That's something that we do to saturate the dirty dishes so we can get them clean. Yeah. Are there any other words you can think of that have to do with the word saturate?
A swimming pool.
A swimming pool. Very good one.
She was weird.
Because you want to be saturated in water if you're in a swimming pool.
I was in a swimming pool.
That is a place we can go to get saturated.
Okay, so what were some things that you noticed about that lesson that helps it become more age appropriate to create this network of words?
She used the words that children might use.
Child-friendly definitions, absolutely. It's really, really wet, right? They can understand that. She drew pictures. She actually didn't even need to write the words. That serves more as a memory aid for the teacher, right? We're not expecting, I want to reiterate that, we are not expecting the children to be able to read those words in any way.
She connected it to their background knowledge. So even though
Yes.
tired had nothing to do with the word, she connected it in some pathway.
Yes, and that's what I tell every teacher that I teach this strategy to, is if the children can give you a valid reason why that word connects, if they can express that to you, that's where the language practice is at, right? That is what we want to see happening, is them having those conversations and using their knowledge and their vocabulary. And so all words are acceptable if they can explain. And so the steps to this lesson are: we introduce our center word, we model adding words ourselves, we have the kids add words, but the most important part is the explain why, right? And then we review this. Now once we build out a web, now this one is just words, but once we build out the web, what can we do with it? Do we ball it up, throw it away? No. What do we do with it? What could we do with it? There's lots of potential here.
Put it by your water table.
Put it by your water table. I love that. Yes, use it in your centers. It could go in a science discovery center, especially this particular word, right? It could go in like a writing center where the children are practicing writing their letters and maybe they want to copy a word or use a word. Do you think that once you get through that 10-minute lesson, you are done with that? Or could you add to it, right? So I learned about saturate, then I start to teach the theme wetlands, and maybe now I'm gonna bring in that. Oh, remember our word web that we did? What if we added wetlands? Because that's land that's saturated with water. And so I began to continue out this web, and again, deepening their vocabulary knowledge, their word knowledge. Okay, so now we taught them a bunch of words, right? Now we want them to do what with those? Use them. So that's where language comes in, right? We want them now to take those words and create phrases and sentences to create more rich language, complex language, both that they can understand, but also express themselves. And so we teach them syntax. Now, we don't teach them the label syntax. We don't teach them what a clause is or an independent or dependent clause, but we teach them how to use those and to model complex sentence structure for them so that they are more likely to use it themselves. So all of those language skills then allows the children to understand narrative stories more, because our narrative stories that you might read the children, are they written in very basic language? I ran, Dr. Seuss books, right? But other books, other language and children's literature that we read to the children are written with very complex language structure. And so it helps them to understand those stories better. And to understand when their own comprehension is faulty. I have a 4th grader who's still working on that. When I read something and I don't understand it, first being able to identify that, and then how to fix it, right? And so these skills that we are teaching them in preschool are going to help them all through their schooling. This is the way we develop language, right? We start out with a very core structure, very simple sentences. If you think about a 2-year-old talking to you, I ran, right? Dog, run. Those 2-sentence words, very basic. Then we move into connecting ideas. The dog ran and the boy chased him, right? So we're moving into more advanced and sophisticated language until we get to the very elaborated sentences. Now, where are our textbooks and children's literature books and even our storybooks that we are reading preschoolers? Where are they written on this continuum? What level? Most of them are written down here in this very complex, elaborated sentence structure. It makes for good storytelling. So we write it down here. But what if a child gets stuck in their language development up here? Now we've created a problem. Now they've lost that comprehension. They're not able to understand. And so that's why we need to explicitly teach them and help them develop those language skills. Okay. So implicit exposure, just hearing the language in the classroom, at home, is enough for many, many children. But remember that parallel growth? We want to catch these kids down here and to catch these children and give them a chance to close that gap. We need to explicitly teach those kids what a preposition is. In the last session, we talked about prepositions. A lot of times we'll say, or a teacher will say, go put the book above the bookshelf. And the child does. And notice what I did when I said it. Put the book above the bookshelf, right? I pointed. So me as a teacher says, oh, they know what above means. But then when they're reading or listening to a story, as they get older, they don't know what above means, and there is no one pointing anymore. then they don't understand. They have a gap in their framework, in their understanding. So we need to explicitly teach things like prepositions to them. Not the word, not the label preposition, but what does it mean to be above something versus below something? We need to be intentional about that. How long do I have? Okay. So there are 4 strategic practices that we like to use when teaching language and interacting with children in language. And then I also want to talk to you about one specific strategy that we've done lots and lots of research on over the years, dating back in the 1990s, dialogic reading. How many of you have heard of dialogic reading? Okay. Different than guided reading. Guided reading is when children are actually reading, right? That's not what we're talking about here because preschoolers aren't supposed to be reading yet, right? Dialogic reading, some people think it's just talking about the book, and that is fantastic. We want that. But the dialogic reading that we have done studies on and we have seen results on goes a little bit above and beyond that. It is taking the book in a small group session. It's got to be small group. And using that book throughout the course of several days. And first we're teaching the labels, the vocabulary of the book, okay? And we start with providing the label. And then we continue to review that vocabulary, make sure they got it, and say, what's this? What's that? What do we use it for? What's the function of a camera or a telephone, right? Then our next stage is to open up that discussion for children. We want to show them the picture in the book and we want to say, tell me something about this page. Tell me what you see. And opening up that conversation. And I'm constantly telling teachers, talking too much. Right? We as teachers like to talk. And it takes a lot. It's a very uncomfortable situation to begin with because now we want the children to talk. We've given them that foundation. We've given them the vocabulary. Now we want them to use it. And sometimes we have to really nudge them and prompt them. And they'll say, dog. Okay, tell me more. What about the dog? And you're sort of sitting in silence for a minute, right? It's a little uncomfortable for both the child and the teacher. But once they get into the habit of doing this, then imagine the rich conversation in language that you'll have. The final step of dialogic reading is to ask decontextualized questions. So if I'm reading a book about the zoo, I'm going to say, tell me about a time you went to the zoo, or have you ever been to the zoo? Teachers always like those questions, right? Have you ever been to the zoo? And the kids are talking, they're super excited. Why don't I want to go there first?
Because you may have some who have never been, then there's something to talk about.
That is absolutely true, yes.
You want them to use the vocabulary that you've built up through the other time.
Absolutely, yes. So, because a lot of times if I say, tell me what you see, or have you ever been, I'm going to get very basic surface answers, right? That thing there, or pointing, right? But remember, I've spent several days developing that foundation, that vocabulary. So now when they start talking to me about something, I hope, and we have seen in our research all over the country, that they do, in fact, use that vocabulary. They are sponges saturating all of the things that we're teaching them. That's what's really cool about this age group. They are just absorbing it all. And so they want to use it, and they will. We just have to give it to them. So now the 4 strategic practices: modeling, good rich language and vocabulary use, joining their play. Kids want to talk about what they're interested in, just like all of you like to talk about what you're interested in. If I'm making them do something else, they have less to say. So join them, insert yourself into their world, and talk to them and have that volley back and forth of conversations. Having conversations with the children and elaborating on what they say. So we talked about modeling good rich language, using specific labels for words, even when you're giving them directions. Instead of put that over there, say put the book above the bookshelf. Do you see the difference? And that's allowing us to teach this language and vocabulary from the minute they arrive to the minute they leave. Joining their play, interacting with them, having conversations, and I can assure you, I have been in so many different centers, in so many classrooms, and we rarely see this. Teachers are talking to kids, yes, but a lot of times they're giving them directions. We want them to get away from that and just have conversations. Just talk to them. And the way that you do that, here are some strategies. Ask them questions. Have them make predictions. Have them make choices. Explain why or how. Have them relate to their own experiences. This is the way that we get those conversations and those volleys going back and forth. Expansions is part of dialogic reading. It's where we take what the child says and we add a little bit more to it. So we're validating what they said and adding a little bit more. If we add too much more, they're like, well, where's my part in that? Where was my contribution? But if we add just a word or two, then they're like, oh, I did it. The teacher likes what I said. And we're pushing them further. And so these are all different ways that we can elaborate on the child's own language. And the more you talk with the children, it's serving two purposes. It's modeling language for them, but it's also giving you an idea of what they are and are not able to do yet, their abilities, so that then you can intentionally plan for what that specific child needs. And we can grow them from where they are. And so I leave that with you, and we do have maybe a minute or two for questions. Both Dr. Foorman and I are here to answer any questions you might have.
One question. So now if you could return your completed survey, your evaluation survey to Christy in the back, she's behind the camera there, and go out back through the way you came, through the maze, through the restaurant, back out to the lobby, and turn right, go back in the big room, and face around.
Thank you all so much.